This is the Sherman Report. Here's Peter Sherman.
Well, it's a brand new week, and I'm hoping the weekend kept you busy and happy. I'm Peter Sherman, and welcome to the Sherman Report. In a few moments, I'll welcome a friend who's in the know about the Middle East. Rick Ekstein has traveled to Israel 3 times since the Hamas war began. He's written about it, and he's seen a lot and heard a lot because he goes there as something of an official observer and has the virtual keys to many doors, not least the Knesset or Parliament. We'll talk about his experiences and his thoughts. After that, I have a few things to say about the Canada Border Security Agency preparing to roll out ReportIn, a facial recognition and GPS-based smartphone app meant to monitor people awaiting deportation from Canada. And then some opinions on the American election as the Democratic National Convention begins today in Chicago. Back with Rick Ekstein in 1 moment.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
Well, here we are, and there's Rick Ekstein. Rick, let me just say a couple of words about you before you jump in. You are an accomplished businessman. You began your career in the forest products business. You developed that enterprise so well that other people now run it, and that allows you to support your personal goals of honoring and supporting Canadian military families, fighting Jew hatred, and advocating for the state of Israel. Your experience was in distributing wood to some 40 countries, including the Middle East and Persian Gulf. What a surprise. You know the area: Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Syria, Qatar, and Israel all did business with you. And I guess it was Western Forest Products that I'm remembering.
Right.
You're a director of CIJA, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. You've been leading delegations of politicians and non-Jewish leaders to Israel regularly since the Gaza War in 2014. And since October 7th, Rick has visited Israel 3 times, meeting regularly with political leaders, including the President of Israel, senior military leaders, and senior members of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with whom you work closely, Rick. And I'm going to stop reading all of your accomplishments because we could use half a program to go through them. You are an accomplished guy. But let me just kick this off and ask you what you make of the latest news about new optimism for a ceasefire.
I don't see it, quite frankly, Peter. Hamas has never accepted anything that made sense. And they've been, as you know, on this rampage now for 10 months. Israel has done everything to wipe out their command and control. And I just don't see them giving up as long as they've got the hostages.
So when I read on Twitter, people kind of celebratory saying, wow, Blinken is not stepping in because it looks like Qatar and Egypt have made some motion and they're feeling good about it. Israel's ready to accept. We haven't heard it from Hamas, and you think that's the wild card and a pretty bad wild card.
Listen, what's the purpose of a terrorist organization? It's to terrorize.
Yeah.
And they do that very well. And I just can't see them agreeing to anything that would give Israel comfort. I mean, as you know, Israelis are living in terror right now every day. There's 100,000 that still can't go home because of the rockets from the south, from the north, sorry. There's still rockets coming out of Gaza. I can't see Hamas accepting anything that would lead to a permanent peace.
But it's such a tragedy. I mean, you've had a chance to see what the rest of us only hear about. I remember you telling readers months ago that this would be a very lengthy engagement measured probably in years, and it would not just be with Hamas. You wrote that, and I remember people passing it around like they had a secret document, and you were the spoiler, and it wasn't secret at all. You were being very open. Has any of that changed?
No, let's keep in mind the people of Gaza in particular. They've been educated for the last 20, 25 years that the best thing they can do is kill Israelis. You've seen their kids dressed up and 4 or 5 years old in suicide bombs. You've seen some of the books that they use in the UN schools. When they teach math, it's if you have 2 Jews and you kill one equals 1 alive Jew. This is the kind of stuff they've been taught for a generation now. So, when we look at Gazans and Palestinians, we look at them through our lens. They have a totally different lens because of the way they've been brought up from day one. And this makes it very difficult for people like Blinken and anybody to understand who they're doing business with.
I had Jack Berkowitz on here last week. You know him, the jeweler, and he's also an ordained rabbi and a fairly outspoken guy. And I said, what's it going to take, in your estimation, to turn people around on the Hamas side and finally find a way for a harmonious existence on 2 sides of a border? And he said, if they started today, it's going to take 20 years, because from mother's milk all the way to adulthood and ability to fight, children are educated, as you just pointed out, from books that even in math use examples like you have 5 Jews and 3 are killed. How many Jews are left? And that's patently ridiculous, but it is apparently true.
No, the analogy I look at is Germany after the Second World War and Japan. When Germany was occupied by NATO force or by Allied forces after the war, they knew they could never get rid of every single Nazi. I mean, it's just impossible. You'd have to kill the whole population. But what they did is they did a denazification program, and over time, they slowly gave them back power, the Germans back power. Now, you'll never get rid of the ideology of Nazism. I mean, it still exists today, but we've made it possible that Nazis have never been able to govern since. And that's what has to happen in Gaza. We've got to get some rational players, whether it be the UAE, the Emiratis are great people, or even the Saudis, to go in there and provide security, education, teach them about civil society. And as the rabbi said last week, over a course of 10, 15, 20 years, slowly allow them independence. And I think there could be an unbelievable opportunity there for those people.
Could be. And it's always a could be. And I look around, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Abraham Accords, or some people call them Abrahamic Accords, where a couple of countries had already signed on. And the word was and still is that in the event of that peace breaks out, if I can use a silly phrase, a country that was as volatile at one point towards Israel as Saudi Arabia is ready to come on board. So the spoiler, and obviously they got into this because they wanted to be, is Iran. So I wonder, because more recently you've been concerned with Israel's northern front and Hezbollah, which is another proxy for Iran, and you predict, or you predicted anyway, ongoing interaction.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, how long is the world going to be bullied by a few countries? You've got this axis of evil, to borrow David Frum's words, with Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And they are literally holding the whole world ransom. And the question is, how long is the world going to allow this? We saw at the Second World War what happened with Czechoslovakia and everything else. The world just doesn't have a lot of backbone, and we're losing Western democracy. It scares the hell out of me. It's not just Israel. I mean, look what's happening in the Ukraine. 2 years ago, that was the bulwark between good and evil. Now it's Israel. Taiwan, of course, is next. And if those 3 go down, what happens to liberal democracies in this world?
Well, I think it's worse than that. I think what you're describing, if all of it is ongoing and in action at the same time, we're dealing with, it's not even incipient, we're dealing with World War III.
Listen, I've said this before. I think we're in the throes of World War III already. It's sort of it's burbling up. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like, whether it's going to be traditional or asymmetrical warfare, but I think we're in it already, and I don't think the West gets it. I think the other 4 nations I mentioned, they clearly understand, and they keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and nobody wants to shut them down. And there's only one thing people like that understand, and that's the quick and surgical use of force to stop it quickly. I think
Well,
that's one of the things, sorry to interrupt, Peter, I think that's one of the mistakes Netanyahu made over the last 20 years. He was allowing Israel to grow and prosper, which they've done tremendously, but he never fully head-on met the terrorists that were still terrorizing Israel. He allowed it to happen on a small scale. You'll send a few missiles, we'll send a few missiles. He didn't draw a line in the sand, and I think that if the West doesn't do that, we are in for a very, very messy next generation.
I can't disagree with you. Plus, you've been there, you talked to these people, including Netanyahu, and you've come to these conclusions, and they're hard to disagree with. The thing that bothers me is when he finally did decide that it wasn't going to be a few missiles here and a few missiles there, what it took was the unpreparedness of Israel to allow for 1,200 inhuman slaughters to take place and a couple of hundred hostages to be taken for Netanyahu to say, that's it, I'm going in and I'm going to see this through to the end. As soon as that became obvious, and it didn't take more than a week or two, we've got people marching in downtown Toronto, they're marching in the streets of London, they're marching in the streets of Paris. Pick a country, it's everywhere. And we find out just how we know that there's anti-Semitism, but we don't really believe until we see that there is unbridled Jew hatred, and it's everywhere. What do we do about that?
Listen, the only thing I think we can do is education. We're spending a lot of time speaking to non-Jews, and they get it. They really, really get it. And I think that's all we can do is keep on educating people. You look at the demonstrators on the streets, queers for Hamas. I mean, Hamas
Ridiculous.
will throw you off a roof, will shoot you, and yet the queer community is supporting them. In a million years, I cannot understand that. But we have to educate people in small groups and large groups, even doing what we're doing right here. Hopefully there's some people watching, and let them know that Israel has the same values as Canada.
Well, we've been on the air for 2 weeks, and we've got about 1,000 people out there, near as I can measure, and it's growing. So, yeah, there are people listening.
Yeah, and listen, is Israel perfect? Is their government perfect? Hell no. Is the American government perfect? Hell no. And ours, we both have some thoughts on our current government. But that doesn't make us hate all Americans, or it doesn't make people hate all Canadians. And it's the same thing. People should not be hating all Israelis who believe in the same things that we do.
So I mentioned the Abraham Accords, and they were like a weapon to start Iran, which is, I think a lot of us believe, where this came from. Why? Because Iran is an outlier country, and it's behind the military groups now involved with Israel on the north and to the west. So they're busy fighting, in Hamas's case heavily, in Hezbollah's case sporadically. Can you explain why the Accords were so important and why Iran seems to fear them so much?
Well, I can try. As you mentioned, I traveled through the Middle East and Persian Gulf 20, 30 years ago. I spent a lot of time over there. And business over there is very much relationship based. And I would go into people's homes. They'd know I was Jewish. And we'd have these wonderful conversations where they would tell us how much they admired Israel. They admired what they had done. They admired their people. They admired the initiative. And they hated Iran and they hated the mullahs. And I'd say, this is a wonderful conversation. Why can't you have this out on the street? And they say very quickly, and I've had this conversation in Saudi, in the Emirates, in Bahrain, you name it, and they all have the same answer. They'll kill me and they'll kill my family. Meanwhile, we got along great. I was in everybody's home. They would send their kids to school in Toronto so my wife Lillian and I could look after them. So this is nothing new at the businessman and government level, this admiration for Israel and this fear of Iran. The fact is they finally were strong enough to make this happen because Iran was getting more and more irrational and more dangerous. But if you took Iran out of the picture, and I would even rephrase it, if you took about 5% of Iran out of the picture, I think everybody else would get along just fine. It's this 5% of the mullahs that are causing all the trouble.
Oh, it's real easy. We just have to overthrow them, but that's not as easy as I'd like to. When I say it, it's a lot easier than doing it. So let me ask you the difficult question of the day. Can you foresee a day where you and I'm in my 70s, I think you're in your 60s. Do you foresee a day when we actually get to look at a peaceful Middle East, or is that out of the question?
I think it's out of the question.
What a pity.
Well, listen, I'll never say never, but it'll take generations before anything like that will happen. There will always be problems over there, in my opinion.
Do you believe that non-Hamas, regular everyday Arabs in various countries, there are about 20 of them in that area, desire a peaceful region that includes Israel?
Yes, I
Wow.
completely believe that. I would take out the Palestinians, as I said, just because, and it's really not even their fault, because of the education process of the last 20 years. But most everywhere else, they want the same things that we do. They really do.
So I've got two final questions, and I think that they're, if I may say so, very pointed and poignant. If the entire gargantuan task we're talking about could be achieved, do you see the unmasking of Jew hatred here and the abatement of it? Would that happen?
I wish, but
Yeah.
anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, and that's what it should be called, has been around, as you know, for thousands and thousands of years. And, I take a lot of Christian people to Israel, and they always say to me, "Why does everybody hate you?" And I say, "What are you asking me for?"
I didn't do anything.
Yeah. It's been there for many, many thousands of years, Peter. I just don't see it. I think it's just something we have to live with. And, these same people, I say, "How many Jews do you think there are in the world?" And they go, "I don't know, 100 plus million." And I go, before 1938, there were 16 million Jews. And now 80 years later, wherever we are, there's still 16 million Jews. And they
In a
still,
world of 8 billion.
yeah.
And we're a problem.
And we're the problem.
I'll never figure it out. I've got the final question has to be asked. If Kamala Harris were to be elected president, is she up to the task that she's going to have to face in the Middle East?
Again,
Sorry to ask that, but it's sitting out there.
yeah, I mean, the answer is who the hell knows. Most people that I know in Israel say they'd prefer to have Trump, despite the fact that he's a little bit irrational and unpredictable. Joe Biden, it's very interesting. People will tell you that Joe Biden saved Israel in October, because he immediately sent aircraft carriers, he sent coverage at the UN, he sent all the bombs, everything that was necessary, and then he got a little twitchy over the last few months. Where is she going to be? I don't know. She concerns me, but I honestly can't give you an answer that would hold any water, Peter. I wish I could, and I'm going to stick around and watch what you have to say about her after this.
Well, I'll be talking about her after we take this short break. Rick Ekstein, thank you so very much for being with me.
It was my pleasure, sir. Anytime.
Talk soon.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
Well, that was interesting. He's a good guy. He's a smart guy, and he's a friend, Rick Ekstein. One day last month, I saw an American President, Joe Biden, say he would soldier on to the bitter end and beat Donald Trump in early November. And literally overnight, he was on television confessing to the American people that he had come to terms with the fact that his age was detrimental and that he was tired in a way a good night's sleep can never address. As a political aficionado for most of my life, I wondered what array of candidates would be speaking to the Democratic National Convention following 4 or 5 weeks of feverish campaigning in a major push to secure the Democratic imprimatur, the nomination for that candidate in the November election. Who would go after the presidency? But within 24 to 48 hours, a huge machine was fired up, one we don't know anything about in terms of its workings. There were no candidates in waiting. There was one vice president, Kamala Harris, ready to jump into the breach and put a quick step into Biden's soldiering on. or a quick stop, I guess, into Biden soldiering on is what I meant to say. In my opinion, Kamala Harris never established herself as any kind of remarkable leader during her vice presidency. No, I'm not here to slag her. I'm just going to say, in my opinion, the powers that be who evoked a decision not to run from a sitting president concluded that they could mount a campaign within a week or two aimed at replacing Biden, revitalizing the Democratic Party, and beat Donald Trump, whose victory was all but assured a month ago. That's at that point. Make no mistake, I am saying that I think what took Biden down and built Harris up was a powerful group of people who were determined. I'm not sure that's how the United States was ever supposed to work. But there you have it. Please don't conclude from this that I am dealing in conspiracy theories. I'm not connected to any. I don't make them up. All I'm doing is stating what I see factually and scratching my head publicly. There's no doubt the speeches at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago will start tonight. They'll all be glowing. There's equally no doubt that the acceptance speech by Harris on Thursday will be crafted by experts to provide the traditional bump as the convention closes. Not that polls don't already show one. Labor Day is 2 weeks away, and the last 2 months of campaigning get going then in earnest. I am equally certain that the Trump team and the man himself were taken a bit off guard, and it's not easy to get Trump off guard. The polls say Harris has momentum. Trump has running mate J.D. Vance, and they're everywhere, but suddenly so is the opponent. I have already declared that my vote, if I had one, would be for Trump. Why? Why do I like him so much? I don't necessarily like him so much. The thing about leaders is that it's never about liking them. It's about judging which one will actually stand up and lead, which one can tame a roiling economy, which one can keep things in check and avoid a recession, which can stare down enemies of America and get the Russians out of Ukraine, the Chinese away from Taiwan, the Abraham Accords we were talking about a moment ago, implemented all over the Middle East as Iran is shown to be no lion, but a simple alley cat. I don't think Harris has that in her. I think she is a female Trudeau, someone who can look and talk the talk, but finds walking it somewhat different. Worse than that, I believe that the United States will become a vastly different and weaker player on the world stage with Harris at the helm. So yes, the guy who isn't very likable but shows leadership quality trumps Kamala Harris for me, and pardon the pun. Worse still is the fact that America has been fighting a Thanksgiving dinner table war inside its households for many years now. I'd have told you it threatens to explode between red and blue regardless of which way things go, but mark my words, law and order will be the first huge issue to tackle, the first big problem for Harris if she does emerge victorious from the November vote. The pro-Trump people do believe that he was cheated in 2020 and will believe it's happened again if he loses this race. And they will show a lot more than displeasure if that happens, and that will be street violence. In a moment, I'll be back with a look at new CBSA monitoring capabilities for use with pending deportees living in Canada. I'm Peter Sherman.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
Well, Canada plans to use facial recognition software in an app that keeps track of those ordered deported from the country. You imagine an app that can keep track of this? This is a face made for radio, and I used to be on it. Now it's the internet, so we've got video and audio. Anyway, on the surface, it sounds okay. When they spot one of these folks, off go the officers to wherever the fugitive was seen by one of those ubiquitous cameras, and they nab him or her, and off they go to the nearest airport or border crossing to take a trip that wasn't being made voluntarily. I don't like it, and I'm going to tell you why I don't like it. It's not because my heart beats strong for Canada's undesirables. It's because that facial recognition software is not only looking for the elusive deportees, it's capturing whatever images it sees of the rest of us. They don't say so, but I am no blind trust type of person where governments are concerned. There's always been a part of me that believes no one should have any expectation of privacy in public spaces. I continue to believe that, but, and there's a but, I take exception to being reassured that the facial recognition software is confined to searching for people who have been judged as non-admissible or ready for deportation. The Canadian Border and Security Agency, or the CBSA as it's called, has wanted this kind of app since 2021. There are a few worrisome things going on here. One of them is at what cost? Why? Because this government, managed to produce an embarrassing piece of garbage called ArriveCan for the same agency at a cost of about $80 million, when a computer hacker in his basement could have built a better one if you'd given him a budget of a couple $100,000, if that. This one is called ReportIn, and it's out this fall. Observers are worried about how the software makes use of information to confirm identities and their locations, and how user consent enters the picture. It uses GPS too, you see, so they know exactly where the person they're looking at is at that particular moment in time. The reasoning provided here is that around 2,000 people deported from Canada each year just fail to show up. What a surprise. This app is smartphone-based, and it seeks to collect information that each individual would be charged with updating so all alien persons deported could be monitored. Another benefit is said to provide the feeling of engagement each client would experience and will recognize the CBSA's sites are trained on them, only on them, him, her, them. My response is that if you are one of these people and don't want to leave our country, toss your smartphone, get another one, make sure you don't go near the ReportIn app. I am not counseling here, but I am pointing out what a desperate person who likes being here could and will do. The CBSA says the info they get on file from the app will make it easier to apprehend people if the day comes for them to show up and they don't show up. Now, explain to me why a non-motivated person awaiting deportation would want to knowingly provide accurate information to the border people. There's an interesting back end that says the facial characteristics of each individual are on hand from photos captured when they're first screened or arrested, and those photos are the reference point when one of these people reports using ReportIn. Sounds good. Plus, their location will register through GPS in the smartphone. All smartphones have that. It also does not track anyone constantly, they say. The basis for this app is Amazon recognition technology, but the basis for its use by CBSA is called a trade secret. I have news for you. When a government agency uses something like this, I start worrying about trade secrets. We're not talking about an employee check-in system. We're not talking about a Costco card with your picture on it. We don't know what this thing is connected to, and we, the taxpayers, are not considered worthy enough of knowing how the system matches a face to a reference beyond what I just explained, and we're footing the bill. We also don't know if other elements of government are using it by, for example, plugging in the vast network of pole-mounted cameras already deployed for public surveillance. Here's what the CBSA has to say. 1, the app is to monitor foreign nationals and permanent residents subject to immigration enforcement to report in without having to show up in person. 2, enrollment will be voluntary. If you prefer in-person visits, no app required. 3, there is always a risk of mistaken results, but get this, it rises with racialized facial features. All I can say is I don't worry about use. I worry about abuse. I also worry about a system that is good enough to roll out, but less reliable for those with a non-white face. Wow, a racist app. Bottom line here is that I recognize good intentions when I see them, and I see them, but I'd like to know the full scope of this next foray into software for CBSA. We already know about the last one. One more thing. Scotland has suspended all meetings with Israel, and this is a completely different subject, but I needed to throw it in. Scotland has suspended all meetings with Israel, demanding full cooperation with international obligations and an immediate halt to the genocide in Gaza. That's a quote. You morons in Scotland, don't you know who buys the stuff you make? Okay, I'm happy to stick with bourbon from now on. I'm Peter Sherman. This has been the Sherman Report for a Monday, Tell your friends about us. Click share on Facebook and retweet on X. Join us every weekday at 5 p.m. for the Sherman Report, or find it on Facebook, LinkedIn, X, or YouTube for video. And listen when you drive, because it's a podcast too, audio, the Sherman Report on all popular podcast platforms. You have yourself a great evening.
You're with the Sherman Report. Daily news commentary available at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, with video posted on YouTube and Facebook. Here's Peter Sherman.